Hello, this is Mr. Goodstein. Welcome to my science class. This will be your first homework assignment, and please make sure that you're doing all of your homework assignments. These are going to be really important for you to do well in class. They'll give you all the information that you're going to need to know in order to take part in the activities that we do in school. So let's start off by going over a few things. First of all, you are going to see that some of the slides have a red background like this. Now, you should have a notes page that goes with each homework assignment. This is the notes page that you should have for this homework assignment. And what you'll notice is that every time that there is a red slide, there will be some matching words in your notes page. So the red slide indicates that you're going to have to write something down in your notes page. When you do the homework assignment, I will be checking to see that your notes are completed. You'll also want to keep an eye out for the owl. This is going to be very important too, because after you're done with the homework video, at the end of it, you're going to have to tell me where the owl was. He's going to be kind of small like that, and he'll be hidden somewhere. It's kind of like a Where's Waldo kind of thing, and you're going to have to find him and tell me where he is located. So make sure you're keeping an eye out for him. You may have to rewind the video and look for him a couple times, but you will have to find him. So the two main things that you're going to have to remember every time you do a homework assignment are red slides mean that you have to write something down in your notes, and don't forget to find the owl because you're going to have to describe where he is. So we're going to start off by talking about what science is. And basically science is just curiosity. It's trying to figure out the world around you. But it's very important that we do this in an organized way, and that's where the scientific method comes into play. Scientific method is basically a process that is used to find answers to questions about the world around us. And you might ask, well, is there only one scientific method? Well, no, there's a lot of different scientific methods. There are several versions of the scientific method. Some versions have more steps, while others may have only a few steps. However, they all begin with the identification of a problem or a question to be answered based on observations of the world around us and provide an organized method for conducting and analyzing an experiment. You can see here many different versions of the scientific method. Some of them are longer, some of them are shorter, some of them are really complicated, some of them not so much. Some of them involved skulls in jars, don't know why. So we have an organized way of figuring out answers to problems. That's what science gives us. So we need something to be curious about here. Well, here's an example of something that a lot of people have been curious about. The question of what came first, the chicken or the egg? And that's kind of a difficult question when you start to think about it. Well, first of all, eggs in general came way before chickens did. Dinosaurs laid eggs, fish laid eggs way before any chickens were around. So I guess what we really mean is what came first, the chicken or the chicken egg. But that's still a little bit difficult because what do we mean by a chicken egg? Do we mean an egg that was laid by a chicken, or do we mean an egg that has a chicken in it? Well, anyway, these are tough questions, but you can form your thoughts about it and give an educated guess about what you think came first, the chicken or the egg. I want you to try this out. What you're going to see next here is something that you've probably seen before, where you're going to see a really close-up image of something, and you're going to have to try to guess what it is. So try to do that and see how you do, and I'll be back after that. So how'd you do? Did you get them all? Some of them are kind of tough. So how did you figure it out though? Well, you looked for clues and you used some knowledge that you already have. Like this picture that you see in front of here was one of the pictures that you had to figure out, and I bet a lot of you got this, but how did you know that that was a leopard? Well, you can see things like whiskers and the nose, and you can see that it has spots on it. And the spots really give you a hint to the fact that it's not just any old cat, but it's a cat with spots, and usually that's probably a leopard. So you had a lot of information to go on to make your guess. So what you were doing there basically was forming a hypothesis. Hypothesis is an educated guess based on observations and your knowledge of the topic. So it includes both some things that you already knew, like leopards have spots, and the observations you made, the things that you could see in that small picture. We're also going to need to collect some data at some point. And data is information gathered during an experiment. A lot of times it'll be represented in graphs or charts or things like that, and we'll work on doing that throughout the year. This picture that you see here is an example from Mythbusters, where they were trying to find out how far cannonballs could go when they're shot out of a cannon, and you could see some of their data that they collected to the right. So really the first step in the scientific method is identifying the problem. What do you want to know or explain? You're going to have to use observations you have made to write a question that addresses the problem or topic you want to investigate, like what came first, the chicken or the egg? Once you've done that, you're going to form a hypothesis. You're going to try to basically answer that question just from what you already know. You're going to take kind of a guess at what you think the answer to the question is that you're trying to find out the answer to. So what do you think will happen? Predict the answer to your question or the outcome of the experiment. And then, of course, you're going to have to create an experiment. You can't just say, well, hey, I thought about this for a long time, so it must be true. We actually have to prove this by doing something, by doing an experiment. So how will you test your hypothesis? You're going to have to develop a procedure for a reliable experiment and address all safety rules. And we're going to go over safety rules in class. Great. And then, of course, you're going to have to perform that experiment. So you'll follow the steps in your procedure to perform your experiment, and you'll record the data and your observations. Then you're going to need to analyze the data. You're going to have to see what the data tells you and make some conclusions based on that. You want to check to see if the data is reliable. Does it make sense? Does your data and observations from the experiment support your hypothesis? In other words, were you right when you took the guess? Is your data inaccurate, or is the experiment flawed? If so, you're going to have to modify the experiment. If you're measuring how tall you are and you come up with something like 10 miles, you may have miscalculated somewhere, and you should probably go back and check that. So you're going to rewrite your procedure to address the flaws in the original experiment. And then it's very important for scientists to communicate their results. They're going to write a conclusion that summarizes the important parts of your experiment and the results. And all scientists do this. Anytime you've ever heard anything in the news, on TV, anything like that, where they have cited some sort of scientific experiment, these experiments have all been communicated with other people and checked out by other scientists to see if they've made any mistakes and gone through all of that process. So that's basically what science is. It's a very thorough way of figuring out answers to questions about the world around you. And everything we learn in this class throughout the entire year has gone through that process. There will be occasional times when we talk about things that are still not very well understood, but I'll always let you know that. Basically, everything that we talk about in this class has gone through a lot of different scientific experiments and through this process of scientific investigation over and over and over again for many, many years. Okay, turn your notes over. There are a few more things that we have to add on to this. First of all, variables. Variables are the things that change in an experiment. These are basically the different things that you're trying to experiment with. And there's two different types of variables. There's an independent variable. This is the thing that you are going to physically change in the experiment when you do this. And I like to say it's what the scientists, or it's what I change when I do the experiment. And independent starts with the letter I, so that's a good way of trying to remember it. And then there's a dependent variable. The dependent variable changes as a result of what happens with the independent variable. So this is the thing that kind of changes at the end of the experiment. We'll go over these in just a second, but please remember that variables equal change. The word variable means change, so it's always something that is changed in the experiment. Let's take a look at an example. So what's going on in this experiment? What do you think that they're trying to do in this experiment? Well, it seems like they're trying to find out an answer to the question or the problem of whether or not different lights affect how a plant grows, right? We can see that we have a blue light and a yellow light and a green light and a red light. So it seems like in this experiment, the question or the problem that they're trying to address here is whether or not these different colored lights are going to affect how the plants grow. So what is the independent variable? Well, that's the color of the light. That's the thing that the scientist changed in the experiment. That's the thing that they actually are doing in the experiment. That's the independent variable. The dependent variable is going to be how well the plant grows in the end. It's going to be what effect does the change in light have on these plants. So independent variable is what the scientists change, the color of the light, and then we'll see what happens to the plants, and that will be the dependent variable. Here's a question though. What did they keep the same in this experiment? Well, the types of plants were the same. Certainly wouldn't be fair in this experiment if they used a sunflower for one of the plants in front of one of the TVs and then used an oak tree for the plant in front of another TV. That wouldn't really make sense. The light source is the same. They're all TVs. They're different colors, but they're all the same light source. Some things that we're not really sure about, but I would think that they would want to use the same amount of water for all the plants. They would probably want to keep the room the same temperature for all the plants. They would probably use the same soil, same amount of time, same amount of fertilizer, the distance from the light source, the room they're in. All of these different things really should stay the same. And this is basically about making the experiment fair. I think you guys would probably agree that if you changed any of these other things, it would kind of affect the experiment, and we wouldn't really know if it was the light source that was affecting the growth of plants or maybe one of these other different variables. You can imagine that if you didn't water one set of plants, but you watered all the other plants, well, of course the plants that didn't get any water aren't going to grow as well, and it might not have anything to do with the lights. So this is a really important idea here, and that idea is that it's very important in a scientific experiment to make sure that everything stays the same except for that one thing that you're trying to change. In this case, the color of the light. Everything else has to stay constant. And fortunately, this is an example of a word that you probably already know. You know what it means to stay constant, and it means the same thing in science. So go ahead and fill in your blanks. Another important part of many scientific experiments is what's called a control group. Sometimes we need a group that we don't do anything to in order to have something to compare our results to. So a good example is something that you see on the screen in front of you right now, where maybe there's a drug company out there that is making a cold medication, and they want to be able to say that the cold medication makes it so that your cold doesn't last as long. Well, they could give a bunch of people that have a cold this medication and just measure how long it takes, and maybe on average all the people their cold lasted for 5 days. Well, unfortunately this doesn't really tell you very much, because it could be that the cold would have lasted for 5 days whether or not they took the medicine at all. So we need another group of people that have a cold that you don't give the medicine to at all. And so then we have something to compare it to. So the group that doesn't get any medicine in this case would be called the control group. We didn't do anything to that group. We're just using them as something to compare to. So if the group that got the medicine, if their cold lasted for 3 days, and the group that didn't get any medicine, their cold lasted for 5 days, well, then we can say that the medication makes the cold last not as long. So, what's the control group in this experiment? Control group would be group B, the group that did not get the medication. What's the problem in this experiment? Well, the problem is, does the medicine get rid of the cold faster? Remember, the problem is the question that you're trying to answer. And what are the independent variables and dependent variables? Remember, the independent variable is what the scientist actually did differently between the two groups. Well, scientists gave one group medicine and didn't give the other group medicine, so that's the independent variable. And what happened as a result of that? That's the dependent variable. So in this case, it would be how long the cold lasted. And what would be your hypothesis here? What do you think is going to happen? Well, I would say that probably the people that get the medicine, hopefully if this is a good drug company, hopefully the people that get the medicine, their cold will go away faster. All right. Another term that you hear a lot in science is the word theory. Now, I think this word gets used incorrectly in normal everyday life a lot of times. And that's all right. We kind of know what we mean when we say it in normal everyday life. But in science, it has a very, very specific meaning. So a theory is basically a hypothesis that has been tested so many times in so many ways that we are extremely confident that it is true. So some examples include gravity and the fact that the Earth is round, which you can see both of these ideas in this picture. Now, if you go on the internet and look up flat Earth theory, you'll actually see a lot of pretty convincing evidence that the Earth is in fact not round, but is flat. I think there's better evidence that shows that the Earth is round. There's been a lot of evidence out there. It was known way before Christopher Columbus was around. It's been known for thousands of years due to scientific observations and experiments that the Earth is in fact round. There was even scientists that were able to calculate approximately how big the Earth was hundreds and hundreds of years before Christopher Columbus's day. So they knew that the Earth wasn't flat at that time. And I'm sure you guys probably would all agree that gravity is a thing, that it does in fact exist. But both of these things are considered theories. Oddly enough, in science, we never really know that something is true beyond any doubt at all. All we can really say is that it's been tested so many times that we are really certain that it's true, and that we really don't think that anything else is going to come around to prove this wrong. And when it gets to that point, that's when we call it a theory. Now, a law in science is something that is kind of similar to a theory, but a law describes the way things work and really doesn't describe why things work. An example of this is something that you may have heard of before, which is an object in motion tends to stay in motion, one of Newton's laws. And the thing about this, the reason why we call it a law is because we have every reason to believe that this is something that happens no matter where you are in the universe. So whether you're that guy in that car there that's not wearing his seatbelt and goes flying out of the car, he's an object that was in motion and is staying in motion even though the car stops. Or if you're a planet going around a star, or a moon going around a planet, or a star flying through space, or any other object flying through space for that matter, your tendency is going to keep doing what you're doing, to stay in motion in the same way that you are. And we think that that applies to everything everywhere. So that's the idea of what a law is. It's something that describes what things do in the universe, and we think, at least as far as we can tell, that they are always true. So that's the end of your first homework assignment for my class. Hopefully you got through it okay. Hopefully you found everything that you needed to find. Red slide notes and the owl. Remember, if you didn't find anything, you can always pause and rewind and take a look at it again. Today we talked about the scientific method. Scientific method starts off with a problem or question that you have to answer. Then you form a hypothesis, which is basically an attempt at answering that question. It's an educated guess, but then we need to do an experiment to really test it out and find out whether that's true or not. We have variables in an experiment. Variables are things that change. The independent variable is the thing that I, the scientist, change. Independent starts with the letter I. The dependent variable is the thing that changes as a result of that. In our experiment that we saw in this homework assignment, we looked at plants and how the color of light affected the growth of plants. The different colored lights were the independent variable. How the plant grew was the dependent variable. We have constants. Constants are something that stay the same in the experiment. In the experiment, in the example that we had, we wanted to keep everything else the same. The temperature, the room, the amount of time, the amount of water, all of those things, we wanted to keep those the same so that we knew it was just the color of light that was affecting the growth of the plants. And we have a control. Controls are used to compare something to. Like in the example of the cold medication, they had to have a group that they didn't give anything to, and that would be the control group. We talked about theories and laws. Theories and laws are things that we human beings really are confident that we know how these things work. We really have a lot of evidence that shows how these things work. So make sure you finish up your homework. Make sure that you have all of your notes filled in. That will be checked in class. And make sure that you have answered the questions at the end. Tell me where the owl was and give me a quick little summary, just a few sentences summing up the main points of what you learned. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.